Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's Pyromancer here, and welcome to my 7.2.5 Destruction Warlock Quickstarter guide. In this guide, I'm going to be kicking it back, throwing it all the way back to my original guide style, where I simply turn on the recording and talked about the class. I know a lot of people kind of miss that structure, so you know what? We're just going to do it for the Quickstarter here. So let's get right into it. There's a couple things you need to know playing a Destruction Warlock, and that is we function on a build and burn type of resource system with something called the Soul Shards. Now, Soul Shards historically have been burning embers. Before that, they were Soul Shards back in the day. But we have transitioned back into fragment-based shard generation. And what that means is for each of your spells, you will get a portion of a Soul Shard, which you can spend on your main ability, Chaos Bolt. And you can also spend it on your main AoE ability, Rain of Fire, as well. Additionally, you can spend these Soul Shards on cooldowns like your Doomguard, like your Infernal, which we'll talk about, and you can also spend it on Grimoire Imp, which is a talent that we'll talk about. So basically, the entire spec is juggling this main resource. You also have a secondary resource, that being mana, of course, which we do have life tap to maintain mana, of course, since eventually you will run out by just casting. But Blizzard has made some nice tuning changes to help alleviate mana costs for certain spells like Incinerate in the new patch. So let's talk about these core abilities. How do they work? What do they generate? What do you need to know about them? So if you go here, we'll talk about Immolate. Immolate is just a ranged attack that deals damage over time. It's a dot, damage over time, and generates soul shards. So for each tick of Immolate, you generate one soul shard fragment every single time that it ticks. And you'll also gain, you have a 50% chance to gain an additional soul shard fragment when it crits. So if you multi-dot targets with this, you're going to see a lot more shards coming in. So now multi-dotting has become a little bit more powerful for destruction for consistent shard gain. The next spell that we'll talk about is Conflagrate. This is a spell that functions off of a charge-based system like a lot of other spells in the game. You have 2 charges, and it is on a baseline, I believe it's 10-second or 12-second cooldown, I believe, reduced by haste. This is going to give you 5 soul shard fragments every time you cast it. It is also doubled by targets affected by Havoc. So if I were to spend this Chaos Bolt and then hit this target over here with a Havoc, if my Havoc was bound on if my Havoc was bound on my bars properly, and then I can flag this other one, I would get a full soul shard 2 times in a row because I had 10 total shard bits coming from those conflags. Now we'll also talk about Incinerate. Incinerate is your main filler spell, coupled with one of our talents that I'll talk to you about. Incinerate can be very powerful. It is simply going to generate 2 soul shard fragments every single time you cast it, and it will give you a third one if you are wearing the 2-piece bonus from Tier 20, Tumus Argeris, and it will give you an additional 4th fragment if it does crit. See if we can get a crit in there. Doesn't seem like we're just getting 3 every time. So anyway, that is the point there. That's only if you have the TOS 20, Tier 20 4-piece bonus. Now, what are some other things to talk about with this class? Now, our main shard dump, Chaos Bolt. Now, Chaos Bolt is an attack that always critically strikes. It is affected by Havoc as well, so Havoc cleave with Chaos Bolt is very, very important as it will net you quite a lot of damage if done properly and timed well. You can see here, Chaos Bolt can hit pretty friggin' hard. So keep that in mind. Aside from that, we also have a spell called Havoc, which I've mentioned a couple times, but haven't really explained what it does. Havoc is a spell that has a 45-second cooldown baseline. It lasts 10 seconds on the target, and what it does is makes it so every single target spell that you cast, which includes Immolate, Incinerate, Conflag, Shadowburn if you are spec'd into that, and Chaos Bolt are all replicated onto the target that has Havoc on it. So if I'm just casting at this target, and I put Havoc on that target and start hitting this one, both of them are going to get hit. Now again, that is only single target abilities, so things like CDF do not work for that. CDF is purely going to go over there because I have Immolate on that target, so keep that in mind. Then we have a couple other baseline spells that we should certainly mention. Again, Rain of Fire costs 3 soul shards and does heavy AoE damage in a 10-yard radius. So that's pretty solid there. They do stack. Rain of Fires do stack, so keep that in mind. You can use multiple of them on one pack, and it will continuously do damage. Now, of course, until they are gone, because they only last a certain amount of time, 6.3 seconds, according to my tooltip here, 4.3 according to my tooltip, but that is with whispers there. So 7.3, just variable depending on your haste. Aside from that, we do have some useful spells like Enslave Demon, which you can use to take control of certain demons for 5 minutes. I have Kilrog, which you can use to kind of go ahead and stealthily kind of scope out areas ahead of you. Very, very cool for taking screenshots, stuff like that. And then another thing that we need to take into consideration is Life Tap. Now, if you watch my mana up here in the corner, this is just on PTR, so I don't have my custom UI or anything. My mana is slowly draining. So what happens in a fight if we are running out of mana? Well, of course, we have Life Tap to take a little bit of our health and give us some mana back. All Warlock specs function off of the same type of mechanic with Life Tap, so keep that in mind. Then you have two main cooldowns as Destruction. You have what is called Summon Doomguard, which costs 1 Soul Shard. It's on a 3-minute cooldown, and it summons a Doomguard to fight for you for 25 seconds. This does bonus damage when the target is under 20%. And then you have Summon Infernal. Now, I want to talk about Summon Infernal because it's very important when you look at it on our weapon. So we have a trait on our artifact weapon called Lord of Flames, which is a passive that means once every 10 minutes, Summon Infernal will summon 3 additional Infernals to serve you for 25 seconds. This is immensely powerful on 3 or more targets. I would even say that it's immensely powerful on 2 or more targets, and with Bloodlust, Summon Infernal with the Lord of Flames is going to be able to give you even more damage than a Doomguard would. So if I summon it here, you'll see I do have the Lord of Flames debuff now, which I cannot benefit from for another 10 minutes. And I have these extra Infernals that are out there doing DPS. Now, on a single target, you can see that these guys are smacking that sucker pretty good, doing about 200k DPS right there. So you can see it's a pretty powerful cooldown, even on single target. But I also am wearing Sindori's Spite, which means my minions are doing 15% more damage. So we could take about 30k off of that. They'd normally be doing about 170k DPS without Lust or anything else. So those are our main cooldowns. The last thing that I want to mention before we get into talents is how we have pets. Now, this is not nearly as much of a pet spec as Demonology, of course, as that's the whole point of demo. But we do have a trait on our weapon called Impish Incineration, which increases damage dealt by your Imp's Firebolt, or if you're spec'd into Grimoire of Sacrifice, it changes to Demonic Power by 50% and by 18% on your Imp, respectively. So whether you're using Sacrifice or Service, this trait is a must-have, and I'll talk about kind of the route which you want to take on your weapon here shortly. But the point of that is, your Imp is going to, by default, do 18% more damage than any of these other pets that you have. So Imp is always the go-to. If you're running Grimoire of Service, you always go Grimoire Imp, and never anything else. If you need to interrupt or something, that may be a special situation in which you have to do that. But generally, you may be better suited to run Mortal Coil or Shadow Fury in that type of situation. So let's talk about talents here real quick. What is the optimal single target setup for Destruction going into patch 7.2.5? Of course, it is going to be Backdraft. Roaring Blaze is sort of a dead talent at this point. The only thing that made it decent in Nighthold, I think, was really the set bonus, and since then it has fallen off. We're not really going to be using that anymore. So Backdraft for pretty much every type of situation. Shadowburn technically can be used for Ad Cleave. I haven't messed with it too much myself, but if you were able to master that, I think Shadowburn could actually be pretty damn good on Ad Cleave fights. Next, you have either ELT or Eradication. Eradication is going to be the go-to for single target or 2-target cleave situations. If there's a lot of ad swapping or target switching on fights like Harjatan or Desolate Host, for example, we're going to want to take Empowered Life Tap for that. But Eradication generally for single target is going to be the best. RE, Reverse Entropy, is an option, but you simply will do less damage with it, period. There's not really any getting around it. It's easier to play with, more mindless to play with, honestly. But it simply is not as good as the other two. And I know I'm going to get the question, well, what if you get the new ring, Soul of the Netherlord, which gives you Eradication by default, and then you put on Reverse Entropy? I think that is certainly viable in a progression setting. However, you will likely do less damage. It is going to allow you to focus more on other things like just doing the mechanics of the fight and things like that, but it still will net less if as opposed to going ELT combined with Eradication from the ring. Next, it's completely your choice. I think Demonic Circle is going to be the best in raid situations, so just my opinion. Shadow Fury can have its place, especially if you have Safuz and can use Shadow Fury to proc it for the haste bonus, that legendary ring. Past that, we're probably gonna change this tier a decent bit. Soul Harvest is by and large the best talent for single target, and in my opinion, probably 2-target cleave as well. Unless they're stacked, Cataclysm may outdo it in that type of situation. Fire and Brimstone is going to give us insane shard generation in AoE situations, which is going to allow us to get more Chaos Bolts or Rain of Fires out, depending on what you want to do. And Cataclysm is going to be the best for burst AoE. I certainly think we're going to see use out of this in the upcoming raid, so I have no reason to believe that Cataclysm is going to be out of the running. It is now on a 30-second cooldown and a shorter base cast speed. I believe the base cast is like 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds as opposed to the 2.5 or whatever it was before. Fire and Brimstone does give you shards for each enemy hit, so this is massive shard generation in AoE, which is fantastic. It's going to be great for us. And then Soul Harvest, again, just 20% increased damage, baseline 12-second duration increased by 4 seconds for each target afflicted by your Immolate. So if you can Immolate multiple targets before popping Soul Harvest, you'll get a longer duration out of it. Generally better Soul Shard generation in your Soul Harvest window because you have Immolates rolling, and that will grant you a little bit longer Soul Harvest. Past that, my go-to is always Burning Rush. We don't really have any baseline mobility aside from Burning Rush. Pretty much everything we have to spec into, with the exception, of course, of Demonic Gateway, but that has to be pre-placed unless you're running pillars, and it's not very efficient if you want to go over here, for example. You know, if you're not moving on that lateral line where your gateway is placed. Dark Pact is certainly an option if you need a heavy DPS, or defensive cooldown, rather. And Demon Skin is great for longevity in fights where you just want passive damage reduction throughout the entirety of the fight, and you're not really worried about big defensive cooldowns or movement. Grimoire of Supremacy technically does sim better single target than Service. Supremacy, however, is not going to be as realistic as Service in most fights. I think going Service is going to net you better. And again, as Destruction, you always want to use Grimoire Imp as your Service pet. There's no reason to use anything else, really. You can just take that off, put it on your bar like that. And you want to use this Grimoire of Service, you always want to save it to use with your Soul Harvest in conjunction with things like maybe your Tarnished Sentinel Medallion if you manage to get one of those out of the raid. Your Potion, you know, those types of things. If you have Lessons of Space-Time, your Shoulder buff that you get from casting your portals. I'll talk about portals here in a second. I wanted to leave that out until I got to the shoulders. And then Grimoire of Sacrifice is certainly usable in AoE situations. 3-target cleave, it's not bad either. It came out to be one of the best talents for 3-target cleave when I was simming it. And then 3 or more targets, it's really good. However, it's not good on priority target damage. And as soon as you are back to 1 target, it drops off a fair amount. Now, the last tier is pretty straightforward. Channel Demon Fire is the best talent for single target. Hands down. You do have to have Immolate applied to the target in order for Channel Demon Fire to be cast on it, so keep that in mind. And if you have multiple targets affected by Immolate, it will split the damage between the two, so you're not going to be getting like double damage or anything like that. But Channel Demon Fire does now function off of a longer baseline cooldown and does a lot more damage than it did in 7.2. So it's certainly a great choice for a single target, and it does do splash damage to anything within range of it, even if it doesn't have Immolate on it, so keep that in mind. It's pretty decent for AoE splash and stuff like that. Wreak Havoc is yet again our go-to talent choice in 2-target situations. Fantastic talent. However, I think towards 3-target Soul Conduit is likely going to net you the most damage through Rain of Fire. So keep that in mind, especially combined with Alethos' Pyrogenics and things like that. Certainly not a bad talent to take for a lot of situations. Now, the last thing I want to mention when it comes to Wreak Havoc is that it is no longer a permanent havoc on your target, pretty much. You don't get 100% uptime with this anymore. What Wreak Havoc will now do is reduce the cooldown of Havoc by 20 seconds. So instead of the cooldown being 45 seconds, it'll be 20 seconds. 25 seconds, pardon me. Effectively almost doubling your uptime on Havoc throughout the fight. So if you can learn to utilize this, this spell effectively, you'll be able to really get a lot of use out of it in 2-target situations. You're going to have to line it up with CB windows, Soul Harvest windows, things like that. You know, if your Soul Harvest has 10 seconds on cooldown and you use Havoc and hit the secondary target, you're not going to have Havoc for when your Soul Harvest comes off cooldown. You're going to have to wait for it. It's going to be a mess. So certainly using Havoc in conjunction with things like Soul Harvest, trying to line it up in certain situations is going to net you a lot of DPS. Now, let's talk about Dimensional Rift. Now, Dimensional Rift is our artifact ability, our actual instant. It has 3 charges on a 45-second recharge, and we do have a trait on our weapon when we cast Incinerate that gives us a chance to get a charge of Dimensional Rift back. It's a 5% chance, so keep that in mind. Basically what this will do, once you have your Flame Rift trait, it's a 1 in 4 chance to summon these rifts. That's a Flame Rift, that's a Flame Rift, and that is a Chaos Bolt Rift. There's also a Shadow Bolt Rift, which is purple, that lasts 16 seconds. And there's also a kind of a Channel Demon Fire Rift that looks very similar to this, that only lasts about 6 seconds as well. So keep that in mind. You want to use those when you're moving. You want to use them with Bloodlust. You want to use them with Soul Harvest. And if you have Lessons of Spacetime, the Legendary Shoulders, you certainly want to use them with your Soul Harvest windows in order to get that 10% bonus damage rolling. Now, how you play with Lessons of Spacetime is really important, because if you're just dumping all of your rifts in the opener, it doesn't really make sense, because the timers that you get for the buff from Lessons of Spacetime doesn't stack for every rift you have. Each rift only gives you a certain amount of time. I got the purple one there, which gave me 16 seconds. So you want to chain them together in your opener if you can to get the maximum duration of this Lessons of Spacetime 10% bonus damage buff. So that's how you play with Lessons. You don't just spam all of your rifts out. It doesn't make any sense. You want to really chain them. Always pool 1 rift charge in case you get a proc, in case you're going to use it with your Grimoire Imp or your Soul Harvest or second potion, whatever it is that you're going to do. Keep that in mind. Now, let's talk about Legendaries real quick. I did make a video just talking about this yesterday, but I put the video up yesterday. It's been recorded for a while. And the best Legendaries for our class, hands down, Lessons of Spacetime for every situation. Sindori's Spite, which is technically a Demonology drop, is also a great Legendary. Just nets a lot of burst damage. Additionally, Magistrike Restraints are fantastic in 2-target cleave. They end up being about 6 to 8% of your damage in 2-target cleave. And then Safuz is also pretty good, especially if you can proc it, because it does have such a powerful haste proc and baseline haste value. Plus a lot of crit and haste are two of our best stats in most situations. And then lastly, of course, we do have Feretory of Souls. I would certainly put this in the top 3 or 4 Legendaries for sure, for pretty much every situation. Feretory is fantastic, and it's going to help even out your shard gain a little bit. However, with how shards function now, it should generally be much easier to get shards anyway. But Feretory is still good. Even after the nerf from 10% to 6%, Feretory is still fantastic, so don't worry about that. And when it comes to tier pieces, you certainly are going to want to get your 4-piece as soon as possible. It's not a huge upgrade. It's only about a 4 to 5% upgrade, going from no piece to 4-piece. So I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think our 4-piece does need a little bit of a buff, or 2-piece or something needs to be buffed, because we have one of the worst set bonuses in this upcoming raid, second only to maybe Arcane Mage from what I've seen. However, there needs to be further validation on that. I'm not 100% sure about that. Trinkets going into the new raid, I did cover in my last video too, but in case you weren't here or didn't see that, some of the best trinkets in the instance are going to come from Harjatan. Charm of the Rising Tide is a solid trinket. On use, granting haste every 1 second, stacking it 10 times, but you have to stand still. Lasts 20 seconds on a minute and 30-second cooldown. Sisters of the Moon drops a best in slot trinket, Tarnished Sentinel Medallion. Baseline mastery on use damage, so keep that in mind. Really, really good. Mistress drops Terror from Below. Also a pretty solid trinket for us, especially in cleave. It is split damage, so even single target, I would say it's pretty decent. Spectral Thurible, not going to be used. I would stay away from that trinket at all costs if you could. And then the last one is Tome of Unraveling Sanity, which drops from Kil'jaeden. Again, not fantastic. Not going to be my first choice, but if that's what I end up getting, that's what I'll use. Additionally, from Nighthold, the trinket Whispers in the Dark from Gul'dan is still going to be a very powerful trinket. I don't have any reason to believe that it won't be, unless they do nerf it. And then, of course, the one from Chronomatic Anomaly, Erratic Metronome, is also going to be good. Arcano Crystal will still be good. Stop asking me. And Kil'jaeden's Burning Wish, if it is one of the only legendaries you have and you need a legendary trinket, need a trinket in general, KJBW is a pretty solid trinket if that's what you have to take. So I think that pretty much covers it in this guide. I think maybe the last thing that I'll show you is what I think the optimal opener should be. as I have outlined on my Wowhead 7.2.5 Destruction Warlock guide, which I'll have a link to down in the description. If you guys don't know, I do write the guide for Wowhead over there. So basically what you're going to want to do is with this single target setup that we talked about, you're going to want to pre-pot, pre-cast Incinerate, cast Immolate, get one of your conflag charges out of there, get your Grimoire Imp going, get your Infernal out, pop Soul Harvest, and then CDF, and then get your Rift. If you have Shoulders, you're obviously going to want to pop that a little bit sooner. Get your on-use trinkets and all that stuff going if you have them on, that type of thing, and then just chain Chaos Bolts. It's pretty straightforward. You're going to want to maintain Immolate in your opener and keep CDF on cooldown if you can. Now that it has a longer cooldown, like I said, it is easier to fit it into your rotation. So just keep that in mind. That opener that I just did there was really not focused around having Lessons of Spacetime equipped. However, you should be much more careful in your opener with Rift usage if you're going to run Lessons of Spacetime. I'm just not used to running them because I don't have them on live, so I apologize. So that's pretty much it. I mean, pre-pot, pre-cast Incinerate, cast Immolate, get a charge of your conflag out there, get your Imp out, get your Summon Infernal out, especially if you're using Bloodlust or if there's multiple targets. Otherwise, Doomguard is going to be the go-to, of course. Get a Rift out, get your CDF on cooldown, and then get your Chaos Bolts rolling. It may not be a bad idea to get a Chaos Bolt on the target first in order to get the 15% damage buff behind things like CDF and your other spells, Immolate, that type of shit. And obviously, of course, always making sure that your pet is not on passive and is in fact doing damage. So that's pretty much it, guys. Two targets, pretty much the exact same thing, except you're going to Havoc the secondary target and then continue your rotation as normal. In this type of situation, you wouldn't have CDF because you'd be running Wreak Havoc, but everything else still applies. It's all about the big burst windows, guys, so focus on lining up your cooldowns. When you spend Chaos Bolts, it's going to be a little more important now than it was before, since our Chaos Bolt generation is a little bit slower. But anyways, guys, that's it for this quick starter guide. It's been about 22 minutes. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to leave them below in the comments section. Drop a like on the video if you liked it, and be sure to subscribe to my content for any future videos that you want to know about anything Warlock related, specifically Destruction. And that is pretty much it, guys. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.